Thank you for coming to this first in a perspective on life in our community. And this is the first in 6 episodes that will be coming to you on a variety of topics. So I think we'll start at the end, and we will ask Nicole first, what does poverty mean to you, and could you give your definition of poverty?
Hi, everybody. So I'm Nicole Bryant, and I'm the hostel coordinator at a place called Home. I also am the manager of outreach services. I've been doing this job for 13 years now. I did it straight out of college and have worked for a place called Home from the get-go, so I'm very familiar with poverty in this area. To me, poverty is very simply a lack of needs. And when we're talking about a lack of needs, I think we need to put it in perspective a bit, because poverty for me and a lack of needs would be potentially not having a vehicle. My need is that I need to get to work every day. That's my need. For somebody who's living in poverty, their needs are much different. So when we talk about poverty from the perspective of somebody living in poverty, needs include food, housing, clothing, healthcare, and education. And poverty is economic inequality.
Good evening. My name is Jennifer Lipinski, and I've been administering the Emergency Home Energy and Resource Program for the last 9 years at a place called Home. I also sit on the Access to Permanent Housing Committee. I also sit on the Financial Assistance Working Group for the LEAP program for the Ontario Energy Board. And lastly, I sit on a steering committee for the Low Income Energy Network based out of Toronto that advocate for low-income programs for low-income energy programs for low-income consumers. So poverty to me means simply not having a real choice and having to do without something that's very, very essential to life. Basically, a basic need. Those that live in poverty are all, daily are faced with having to make very difficult and painful decisions, whether, they're going to pay their hydro bill, pay their rent, get groceries, pay for a much needed medication. And it's a constant, persistent juggling of these basic needs. And it's almost like, having a gray cloud over your head or being punished for something you haven't done. Because, no matter how hard you try, it seems the journey to get out of poverty is a difficult one.
Hi, I'm Roberta Somerville, Executive Director of Kawartha Lakes Food Source. I've been there since day one, which was 11 years ago. Poverty means, to me, is food insecurity, unemployment, underemployment, and low wages. When someone has to choose between putting gas in their car to go to their part-time job or buy groceries, that's poverty. The woman chose the gas in the car because if she didn't show up to her job, she wouldn't have it anymore. That's one eye-opener of the working poor. So that's what's underemployment, the low wages, and of course, because I deal in the food, it's the food insecurity.
Good evening. I'm Rod Sutherland, Manager of Social Services for the city. I've been working in social services for just over 20 years, including primarily social assistance programs. We administer Ontario Works, as well as children's services, childcare, subsidized childcare, and homelessness programs for the city, as well as the County of Haliburton. From my perspective for poverty is primarily from the lens of social assistance, social services. The people we serve are almost exclusively living in poverty, whether it be situational poverty based on their current situation or generational poverty. And I just want to make clear that that sector is just one small part of the population of people in poverty, but it is our primary focus. For these, the people we're serving is primarily around the inability to meet their basic needs and the lack of choice. Their circumstances with their the resources is they're not able to make a choice that most people can. So when it comes to, or the choices they are making are between which bill to pay one month, the next month paying the alternate bill in terms of basic survival. But it's primarily around that lack of choice and inability to meet just basic needs.
Good evening. My name is Bill Huskisson. Some of you may not know or do know that between 1937 and 39-40, we moved from Alberta to Ontario. It was a real experience to live for 3 years in a tent with my mother, my father, and my younger sister, and my baby brother. Summer and winter. We were in a survival mode for almost the day that we come. But as a youngster of 9 years old, I didn't know we were poor, because there were 10 other families up and down the road who were also living in poverty. All I knew that I had to go to a farmer's well and carry water to make sure that there was drinking water, and also wash water for my mother. We lived off the land, so to speak. We picked berries in season, and we fished out of season. We didn't have hydro. We didn't have transportation. But we survived. There was a certain instinct that I think was inherited from my father and his family of 10 brothers and sisters that enabled us to carry through for those 3 years till we moved to a village. And then it was the village that carried us. Thank you.
Thank you all for that. The second question we have for the panel is putting a human face on this, and I think Bill has done a nice segue into doing that. Each of the panelists has a slightly different perspective, and I think we'd like to ask them to tell us about the community that they deal with that is in poverty. Who are these people? And what are their numbers, and how are they affected? So I think we'll start with Bill and go back the other way.
A few years ago, we were a member of Queen Street United Church. And it's a church over 40 or 50 years that's had a particular social issue justice mentality. It's a church that has meetings for 3 different groups of AA, Al-Anon, over the week. And they were one of the first churches to consider a food bank. I was often surprised on a Sunday morning to see how much groceries was brought by the congregation to start this embryo food bank. Now it has grown so that there are 5 church who are supporting it with volunteers. And so naturally, in some ways, the Poverty Coalition, in which has been renamed as a more positive impact, the Poverty Reduction Network. And we're presently in hiatus, but that's because of what is happening in the city and the city bureaucracy. So it's been kind of a lifelong journey, if you want to call it that, watching what's happening in our own life, or in our own family, and what's happening in this town of Lindsay. I was on the fire department with the ambulance for 30 years. And during that time, I was amazed when we would go into some homes and find that people were living in the attic, on the third floor, on the second floor, and in the basement. And even when the students come back now, at 11 o'clock at night, I can drive around and check out the attics where people are living. One of the most disastrous times in my life as a firefighter, when we lost 4 students in an attic on Glenelg Street. It was an indelible experience for me as a first responder to listen to those cries in a house that should not have been occupied in the manner it was. Those are some of the things I have seen.
For social services perspective, in our office with Ontario Works, we have currently about 1,400 families in City of Kawartha Lakes that are on Ontario Works assistance. In addition to that, there's over 2,100 families on the ODSP program, the Provincial Disability Program. With each family member, the average, I'll give you the stats, that's over about 5,000 people in total within the community that are on assistance. The social housing aspect of our department, there's about 500 and just over 500 people or families that are on the wait list for social housing at any given time. It was 515 back in July. And for social housing, there's currently between a 2 and 5 year wait to get into a unit, depending on the location and the size of the unit. From a 1-bedroom is the highest demand, and slightly shorter for some of the larger units. Depending on the location somebody's willing to go to, people will move between municipalities for social housing as well. There are several areas in Northern Ontario and many more remote areas where there's virtually no wait list if you're willing to live in a very remote area. That, in many cases, will increase the impacts of a lot of the other issues in terms of transportation and impacts of living in poverty, obviously, if you're isolated. Many years ago, I worked in Sault Ste. Marie, and just outside of Sault Ste. Marie on St. Joseph's Island, there's a community there which had no waiting list and had vacancies at any time. That was about an hour drive outside of Sault Ste. Marie, and I think the closest, about a 40-minute drive to the closest grocery store. The people that are applying for social assistance or Ontario Works varies. Over the last number of years with the recent recession, our caseloads were significantly higher. Ontario Works is a much shorter term, more responsive application time as opposed to the disability program. The needs test for it is very strict, very limited on who qualifies for social assistance. It's very restrictive in terms of income and assets. So the people that do qualify are really people that have nothing. What we saw through the recent recession, and we saw this in the 90s as well, that we saw more and more people coming on assistance that had to exhaust all their assets, all other options before they could get there. And that greatly diminishes the health of the community in terms of the ultimate impacts on the community. Once to get back on their feet, or once they are able to get back on their feet, they're really starting back from scratch because they've exhausted pretty much everything they had. There are some recent changes, and there's continuing to be some recent changes, and we'll get into that more around the poverty reduction strategy, or some provincial changes to legislation actually taking effect this fall that are very minimal, but it's a step towards reducing some of those real barriers to social assistance in terms of the longer term impacts. But right now, like I said, there's over 5,000 people in social assistance in City of Kawartha Lakes.
Thank you. I just want to give you a little bit about Kawartha Lakes Food Source and its member agencies. which are public food banks and social service agencies. We serve between 1,500 and 2,000 people every month, of which 40% are children. And only 50% of those served are on social assistance or disability support. 8% are seniors, 7% are students, and 30% are employed. As well, over 25,000 snacks, and it includes some milk cartons, are distributed to the schools in 1 month. The Fresh Fruit Program is a weekly pickup at a cost to KLFS of $530 per week. The Fresh Fruit Program was initiated a few years ago thanks to some funding, and then we carried it on, and now we have funding this year from the CSIF. I must tell you that there are children there that have never seen cantaloupe, kiwi fruit, are so excited when the fruit comes into the school that if you're not first in line, you're not going to get any this week. Now the teachers have to send stuff around to each classroom. It's just to put a face on it, you know, the girl that said, "What is that? I just love it, and can we have some more?" She was talking about cantaloupe. She's 8 years old and had never seen it before. So we know it's working. We know that the children who get these snacks and this fresh fruit learn better. This helps their social abilities as well. And by all costs, we've got to keep that going. I was surprised that out of our numbers that 30% were employed, so we named them the working poor, of course. I thought it was less than that. The seniors of 8%, well, there's more than 8% that need to go to a food bank, but they refuse to do it.
In 2012, the Emergency Home Energy Program served approximately 289 families who saw a staggering $305,000 in energy and housing needs. Primarily energy, but still we were serving clients with other housing needs as well. Fortunately, the program was able to resolve approximately $265,000 of those requests for assistance, and this is before issuing any grants or loans. And this is what we are thankful for, because we do receive some direct client funding, but it would certainly not meet that demand. It's to a much smaller degree the funding that we receive. Our caseloads are increasing. In the last about 5 years ago, we would see between 15 to 18 families per month looking for assistance. And now we are currently seeing an average between 35 and 45 families per month. It is definitely increased. I can tell you that even back when I started at a place called Home in 2004, we thought, if we hit $60,000 in a year of requests, that was high. So, we have times that by 5. So the need is really increasing. Many of our clients are single mothers who are in receipt of Ontario Works. I would say that is probably the majority, single mothers and fathers, but it seems to be a little bit more mothers who just simply can't make ends meet. No matter how hard they try to stretch those dollars, they just won't meet. Clients on ODSP would be the next group of individuals who access our program on a consistent basis. Again, their circumstances, they receive a little bit more funding than those on Ontario Works, but still, it's just not enough. It's just not enough to meet those basic needs. And we are actually starting to see a higher number of seniors, which is a concern. Because many of these seniors are talking about returning to the workforce. If they could land a full-time job, they would be thrilled. Many of them have part-time jobs. So I am really, really concerned about that circumstance because, you know, they've already, you know, put in their time, and they shouldn't have to be struggling so hard to make sure that their most basic needs are met. Most of our clients are victims of circumstance, whether it was a lost job or an illness, or, you know, a family has broken down, a separation, divorce. There's so many different reasons why someone ends up in the circumstances that they've gotten into. And I can tell you for sure that it is rarely due to money management.
A place called home, the shelter sees over 350 people each year, and the range that we see is just incredible. We've had pregnant mothers in the shelter who have gone to the hospital, had their baby, and come back with the baby. We've had people, I think, as old as 98 years old in the shelter. So the range, the age range is just incredible that we see. A lot of them are low-income working people. We see a lot of males aged 35 to 45. The common thread with all of these people is that there's a lack of family and social support. So while everyone's gender or age might differ, that's really the common factor that we're seeing with the people that we see. I can give you an example. We had a family with 6 kids, and the dad had a good job, but when their house that they were renting sold, they couldn't find anywhere else to live, and they just didn't have the family support to be able to take them in, so they ended up at the shelter. We had another fellow who was working full-time. He owned a house, he had a boat, a truck, and the plant that he was working in closed. And he was able to sustain in his house for about a year, and then he had to go on to, he was on EI, and then he had to drop down to Ontario Works, and eventually, you know, you start selling bits and pieces just to make ends meet, and in the end, you have nothing. And so that's somebody that we saw. We see a lot of homelessness on TV, and it's much different than the homelessness that we see in Lindsay. In Toronto, you see transient people sleeping on the street, on cardboard boxes, park benches. Not to say that we don't get that here, but that is not a chronic problem in Lindsay. We get situational housing, so we get lack of affordable housing. We get, you know, a house infested with mold, and the people have to move out. But again, it all comes back to that lack of family and social support, in that they don't have anywhere to go when these situations arise. I know that if I was renting and I found mold in my place, I would have somewhere to go, and that wouldn't be an issue for me. But for so many people living in poverty, it is. And so that's the common thread of the face of the people that we see.
Thank you all for that. Moving along, under the, I guess, the heading of what are the challenges faced by those you see, I'll have individual questions for, starting with Nicole. For those in temporary shelter, other than primarily finding affordable housing, what other needs do they have?
So while finding permanent and affordable housing is always the number one goal for people when they're in our shelter, a lot of the times we need to stop and take a look and try to figure out what the reasons are that might have brought them there in the first place. So finding affordable housing in Lindsay is difficult, and if you're a single male, which, like I said, is the majority of what we get, if you're not working, you're on Ontario Works, and unfortunately, the cost of living in Lindsay is actually fairly high when you're renting. And if you're looking at renting an apartment in Lindsay, say even a bachelor apartment, if you're on Ontario Works assistance, you're not going to be able to do it. You need to rent a room. And so one of the challenges is just trying to find that affordable housing. But if we work backwards a bit, we're looking at some of the barriers that brought the person there in the first place. So we're telling them to get out there and find housing and, helping them do that. But we're also dealing with mental health issues. We're dealing with addictions. We're dealing with no family. We're dealing with abuse issues. So trying to kind of manage all of those things at the same time while move them forward is difficult sometimes. So definitely, I mean, when we're talking about addictions and mental health, then we start talking about wait times and lists to try to get people into certain agencies to receive help. So it becomes very difficult to try to do all that, especially because we work from a 6-week time frame. So people come in and they've got 42 days to kind of get it together and get back out the door. And when you're looking at a multitude of issues, that can sometimes be really difficult. So.
I did take a look, and I did crunch a really meager budget. I mean, bare bones. So basically, if we were looking at a lone parent with one child on Ontario Works with an annual income of $16,683 per year. Now, if that lone parent, it depends, they would have to make a decision. First off, whether or not they would choose to live in a 1-bedroom apartment or 2-bedroom. Usually, a child has to be in a separate room. So a parent might decide to get a 1-bedroom apartment and sleep in the living room on a pull-out couch. That would not be uncommon because the rents in Lindsay are extremely high. A 1-bedroom apartment is $796. And that's plus utilities, plus water, plus heating. A 2-bedroom apartment in Lindsay is $958. So that lone parent, when you break it down, she's got approximately $1,390 for that month. How is she going to spend those dollars? So basically, there's 2 scenarios. Even with just bare bones, $100 for hydro, let's say $100 for gas, $75 for water, $40 for phone, very meager, bare bones budget. And no matter what, that household's going to go into a deficit. There's just not going to be enough money to cover the basic needs. And certainly not if she rented a 2-bedroom. That would be not even possible. A single adult, if we looked at a single adult, who is working, making minimum wage, brings in approximately $18,655. If he goes and gets himself a 1-bedroom apartment, again, very, very basic, bare to the bones budget. I mean, this would be like having to conserve, like extremely conserve on all his utilities and so forth. And again, same amounts for utilities, but let's say that, he has to drive to get to his job. Let's say he has to drive to Peterborough, and, that's going to run him another $160 a month. Plus, he's got car insurance and, in a car payment, let's say. By the time he pays for all those things, which are really, those are things that he needs to meet his basic needs, well, he's not going to be able to. He's going to be in a deficit, no matter which way he turns. So those are definitely the challenges that I'm seeing, is that, it's not that clients are, mismanaging their money. It's not. It's that there's just not enough money to go around to meet those needs.
I was asked what the challenges are for those using the food banks. There is regular access within the city of Kawartha Lakes. The 17 food banks all have days that they're open or hours that they're open or whatever, but if you live in Lindsay, you should access the Lindsay ones, and then if you live in Omemee, you should access the Omemee ones. However, if you have a part-time job in Lindsay and you're not in Omemee when it's open, then you go to the Lindsay Food Bank, and they try to help you. reminding you that the Omimi is open on a certain day. The biggest thing is that it's the stigma of going to food banks. I still have phone calls at the office asking me where the nearest one is, what all is required for to get food. We have a client intake form that all the member agencies comply with. You have to show your expenses, you have to show your income, just like anywhere else. And some people go, oh, I can't do that, so I won't go. So what do those people do? Like, I'm asking the blank phone, well, what are you going to do? Like, you've just called and said you have no food. The seniors, like I mentioned before, I can't go. No, I might go for some cat food for my cat, but I wouldn't get any food for myself. You know what that senior's eating, don't you? It's the cat food. I can't go there because my neighbor goes there. I know my neighbor goes there, and I don't want her to know that I'm in this situation. That all aside, our other biggest challenge is there's never enough fresh food. We deal primarily in non-perishables, and there's a shipment that goes out every month to all our member agencies, but you know, fresh food does so much more. The health of the children, the dental care for the adults, etc. We do get quite a bit in the summer, but very little in the winter. We try to access farmers that grow root vegetables so that we can store the root vegetables, the squash and that, for longer in the winter. But come the winter, there's no gardens going, et cetera, and people are therefore existing on the non-perishable foods. And there's no, other than canned ham and flakes of something or other, that's the only meat that comes out of our warehouse. So fresh meat as well. We do have a couple of farmers that donate their meat after they've killed the cow, but that's gone within 2 weeks. So I think that once you got over the stigma, once you got there and learned that they weren't all monsters interviewing you and they gave you some food, that's a real big help. But you're not getting anything fresh. You do get some milk. You're not getting any fresh to supplement. I think that's a big challenge if we want to move forward. You know, the common myth of if people would just budget their money better, or why don't they get a job, is so annoying because low-income families are spending over 30% of their income on housing and utilities. And education, therefore, is a big thing with me, because when we're standing at the grocery store saying, would you like to donate a toonie? And somebody says, oh, these people should just get a job. You know, you really have to reel back and think, you know, you're not educated in what's going on around here and how much that toonie would mean.
Rod, other than the things you've spoken about, waiting lists and the number of people and the times, what other challenges are there in looking for affordable housing?
I think some of the things Jennifer was covering around housing, particularly that we see, is the costs of moving, setting up a new residence for people on assistance. As you probably know, is that virtually every apartment or landlord will require a last month rent deposit. Utilities, which are almost always excluded now in most places, are not included. Those deposits on their own will be far more than social assistance check. The former community startup benefit, community startup and maintenance benefit that was available to social assistance recipients, was eliminated last year by the province. We did approve, council did approve a similar program for this year that we have, our shelter fund, but the absence of that provincial fund is making it very difficult. across the province. It's a patchwork of programs across the province by municipality. We are with the housing and homelessness plan that is being implemented for January 2014 will include ways to address that and trying to redefine a little bit that shelter fund policy to help people on social assistance. The broader issue for affecting housing and just daily living is the inadequacy of income levels for people on assistance. It is intended, originally, social assistance was always intended to be a program of last resort. The problem is how do we help people who we can't help? When they come to us, we're supposed to be that last resort, and there's so many people that we're not able to help now because of the regulations, the legislation, and the policies that we have to follow, and they're in place everywhere. But when they're not covered into those things, how do we help them? And that's becoming more and more of a challenge for us as an agency and the community as well. There's things that are coming together, different groups helping, but it gets to the point of how do we serve those people that none of the programs are there for, that are meant to be the last resort? And should charity really become a public policy for certain healthcare items, for example, that we don't cover? It's just the range of things that aren't being covered when somebody has an emergency. One emergency might be able to be dealt with, but those types of emergencies come up on a weekly basis or monthly basis for most people. And people in poverty in particular are living day to day, let alone paycheck to paycheck.
Thank you. And Bill, under that auspice of what are challenges faced by those, other than the ones that are have been mentioned, are there any others that you could talk about?
At one time, we lived in the South Ward. That's when I was working on the railroad and I could walk to work. So we attended, our children, some of our children who were born at that time went to the South Ward School. And I also went on those nights that they had the parent councils, and was actually asked to take part. That was 50 years ago. Our telecare office now looks out on the main thoroughfare or path that leads from the neighborhood to that South Ward School. So it's a real vantage point to watch the children and their parents go to school and come home again. First of all, you have to recognize that some of the clothing that is worn is less than what churches send to Toronto for rags. Other thing you see is some children may be running, but mothers are actually pulling them along. And so during our time as a poverty reduction network, I asked the principal of that school to come and address the network and give us a profile of that student constituency as well as the parents. It was a real eye-opener. There was information that was being released by him that nobody in the community probably had heard before, other than the Board of Education. We discovered that 45% of those parents and guardians of those 140 children were on welfare. So we have a Rethinking Poverty brochure here that says, do you know you're paying $2,300 to $2,800 as a cost for people who are on poverty? The principal mentioned the number of times that Children's Aid have to be called, The police have to be called to homes for domestic violence, and those other things that suggest things could be better for many families. And so I was asked to go on the parent council as a person looking in. And I did for 2 to 3 years. So my question is, how do you empower these children and their parents to do more and be more? This is Terry Fox run this past weekend. I actually saw a mother crying because her child came home and asked, can we give a donation to the Terry Fox run? And he's, no, we haven't got it. And there was a terrible commotion in that family from that child because he couldn't contribute. I saw parent council having movie nights for 25 cents and popcorn for 15 cents, trying to bring their people together. And yet one of the first things we did when we become aware of a lack of communication between parenting and children, as a poverty coalition, we had a spaghetti dinner. Full-fledged spaghetti dinner. Prior to this, they maybe would have 15 out for an event. We had over 100. And even though the health unit said my wife couldn't make a flat cake because we didn't have 3 sinks in the kitchen at home, they finally said she could make muffins. And so our legal aid consultant, who is a member of that, carried my wife's muffins around to parents. And at the same time, she handed out her business card, said, if you have any landlord-tenant issues, please give me a call. Collaboration and partnering is a terrific exercise for everybody to get involved in. The other thing is to find enough money for a school to bring a wreath to Remembrance Day and have 2 children who never came to a cenotaph celebration before proudly walk to that cenotaph and lay that wreath. My father was a veteran of the First World War, but I always go to see the children bring the wreath. Thank you.
Thank you. Moving on, we're going to look at what each of the organizations represented here are doing to assist those in poverty. And I'll start with Rod first. You've been spearheading the poverty reduction strategy. Could you tell the folks about the process and what kind of recommendations will be coming out of it? And maybe you could speak a little bit about the coordination between the agencies.
Sure. First, I've been chairing the Poverty Reduction Strategy Steering Committee. I haven't been spearheading the work to date. The committee is made up of representatives of a number of community agencies, and it's a joint project with the County of Haliburton as well. Councillor Elmsley, Councillor Davis from Haliburton County, United Way Family Health Team. I'm losing my mind. ULinks and Lindsay Family Health Team, Community Legal Clinic, John Howard Society, and I apologize if I left anybody out. United Way. The work started in the fall of 2010 following a deputation to the City Council by the Poverty Coalition, Poverty Reduction Network to request a poverty reduction strategy for the community. It has, and it began in 2011. We're now late 2013. We have made progress. A report was brought to councils last year, an initial report. Following, there's extensive consultation, community forum held up in Halliburton, and a number of interviews and online surveys. The time it's taking, I guess, and from our discussion tonight, is obvious that it's not a simple. There is no simple solution to poverty. I don't think anybody thought that going into it, but it's becoming a much longer process because of the detail we're getting into in some of the areas and trying to come up with clear plans and action plans. Actually, tomorrow at City Council, the first it's a housing action plan is being presented to City Council tomorrow with 14 recommendations regarding housing and affordable housing. 3 other areas are currently being worked on in employment and education, transportation, and childcare. Those sections will be coming forward to council over the coming months. The recommendations that we hope to get were very specific and action oriented. These shall be done, and not so much in terms of let's study this or let's try to identify what the problem is. Everybody agrees there's a problem, and everybody wants to come up with real ways to present solutions. The challenge, I would say, from that is that almost everything has a cost to it. To say that the city will, there's recommendations there around the planning and development of affordable housing, a 25% goal of new development being affordable housing. That's existing within the city's official plan, I believe, as a goal. That's not something that tomorrow can just be done. Okay, this is what will happen. It is a process for developers, it's a process for city staff, for everybody involved. So the recommendations are fairly direct and specific, but we'll have to see after tomorrow in terms of where the recommendations go in terms of the time frames for implementing each and every one. The same with the other ones as we go forward. There may be specific recommendations. Some of them will come with costs, whether or not they can be implemented within the city budget or the county's budget, and some of them will also involve recommendations of changes at other levels. Not everything that has been recommended is specific to the municipality to do. The province and the federal government and the community and all residents have certain roles to play in it. So we're trying to separate that out in terms of responsibilities. So we're hoping tomorrow's action plan on the housing sector will be received well, and in the coming months that the others will come forward and live from there.
So, Bill, perhaps you could tell us what has the coalition been up to?
The coalition, over the decade or so that we've been in existence, almost as an ad hoc group in the community, has at times, I guess, after a particular meeting, we've asked ourselves, well, was there anything worthwhile come out of that? However, I'm a strong believer in collaboration and networks. When you sit down with 10 people around the table who are representative of services in the community, and we discover some nugget that we didn't know about in the past that can serve a segment of our community, the time we spend is never wasted.
Roberta, I'll go to you next and ask what the Kawartha Lakes Food Source, how they're making out, and going forward, what kinds of things are they doing?
We're pretty much, collecting, sorting, and distributing reclamation food to all our member agencies, and then the 12 to 15 school breakfast programs. I am part of the newly formed Kawartha Lakes Food Coalition that's working on 7 action plan pillars. The one of which, of course, that I'm deeply involved in is the food security and access to healthy, affordable food for all. because that brings in promoting and expanding community gardens, cooking skills, education for making healthy food donations, increasing number of soup kitchens, and expanding the Grow a Row program, just to name a few. Jamie's also has been involved with some of that. I find this wonderful because there are so many organizations in the city that have come to these meetings, put in their 2 to 5 cents worth, and these action plans are they're based on the food charter that was passed. And these action plans are going really quickly. They're not all going to come to fruition at once, but the part of the community gardens, for example, we had 3, I think, last year. There's over 80 plots at Sir Seven for Fleming this year, of which 2 were for donation plots, Place Called Home, myself. And we found that food banks, once you talk to them, are actually, or their church, is doing a community garden to donate to us or to donate to their own food bank. I mean, that's just this year, within 6 months, that is going great. The cooking skills, there's more interest in that, particularly to get the children learning how to cook. My whole thing is that if you get to the children early enough with budget, cooking skills, healthy eating, because that's the next generation, and they will learn that they can do more and get out of their situation. So although we keep doing what we're doing at Kawartha Lakes Food Source every month, and it's a constant process, we are branching out into other areas. And I have found this, the food security or the coalition, a tremendous help. It's amazing to hear around the table, 13 different organizations talking about what they're doing.
Thank you. I have a dual question for Nicole and Jennifer. Perhaps you could talk about what a place called home is doing in addition to being a shelter, such things as youth in transition, the outreach service, and the identification clinic. So if you could share that question.
Okay, I'll just whip through our services really quick for you guys, and then I'll let Jennifer talk about her program. So our core shelter program is a 19-bed shelter. We serve men, women, and children in City, Kawartha Lakes, and Haliburton County. In addition to that, we have what we call homelessness prevention programs, and these programs are made to help people before they end up at the shelter, so to stop that homelessness from happening. So one of the programs we have is our outreach services, and what we do is we are there 24/7, same as our shelter. The only criteria you have to use those services is that you can't be living at the shelter. So when people move out, sometimes they need that little extra hand still for maybe a month or 2, and that's what we're there for. We're there for any questions, referrals, any issues that crop up. If you need something in the middle of the night, we're there to help. We have our Youth in Transition program, which assists youth ages 16 to 25 and up to 32 with barriers. Through that program, we run a trusteeship program through Ontario Works, and so our Youth in Transition worker acts as a trustee for youth ages 16 and 17 who need to be on social assistance, and helps them with getting enrolled in school, finding housing, managing their money, that kind of thing. We also have an identification clinic, and that's administered out of our office as well. And what that does is helps people get ID who need it to basically live. So if you don't have ID, you can't open a bank account, you can't get a job. These are all barriers to moving forward. So this program helps people get those pieces of ID so they're able to move forward. The last thing that we have happening is we just opened a satellite office in Haliburton, and that's a very, very underserviced population up there. So we are there 4 days a week, and it's all of the programs that I just said, only in Haliburton. So we service Haliburton, Minden, that whole area. We don't have a shelter up there, but we are making do with hotels and things like that for now. So
The Emergency Home Energy Program basically tries to assist any individual who is suffering from an energy crisis. So if their hydro is being disconnected, their water is being disconnected, they've run out of fuel, such as oil or propane, or facing a disconnection of water, any of those kinds of things, we will attempt to address them. Sometimes what we do is we negotiate payment arrangements with the utilities, and more times than not, we are negotiating arrangements because the level of funding we have to actually issue to clients for grants and loans is fairly small. So most of what we do is negotiate arrangements. However, we also are able to negotiate things like getting security deposits removed, accessing different customer service measures that are extremely helpful. And now we're able to get very long arrangements for clients, especially for hydro. So it's a huge, huge plus. We also offer financial planning to clients. It's basic budgeting, but anyone who is struggling with their budget, they can come in and we can sit down and we can forecast their next month's budget together. It's an exercise that we work on together, and I think it's very important that clients realize that they're not just being told what they need to do, that they're helping to formulate those decisions and so forth, the plan. Basically, as I said, we do loans and grants. Our loans are based on, we generally issue them, the minimum payment's $25 a month. They're interest-free, and they're flexible. So if a client is really struggling, we can quite often, give them a break that month and, not worry about if they've missed a payment. We just carry on. With our grant program, it's, they're under no obligation to repay. And the only reason we issue a loan program is so that we can recirculate those funds to help other families in crisis. So again, we are serving a huge amount of clients. As I said, back in 2012, we did about $305,000 in energy arrears and housing needs. In terms of housing needs, we do look at trying to raise funds for last month's rent, or any other kind of unusual housing need that they can't get met in any other way. So we do attempt to try to fill in all those gaps where there's gaps in other programs. So basically that would be it mostly. So thank you.
All right, we're going to enter a rapid round here where I get them to try and answer in one or two words. So I'm going to throw out a question, and I'd like a show of hands from the panel. Do you think poverty in our area is improving? Are there fewer people living in poverty, or is it worsening in that more people are living in poverty? By a show of hands, worsening. Okay. And by a show of hands, it's getting better. I assume from the lack of response, it's staying the same. It's either worsening or staying the same.
If I can interrupt. The thing about it is we have led something out of the bag that hasn't been known to the population. And you're amazing what kind of resources they're there. The particular church congregation I go to, I can't believe what's happened within a year and 18 months. There's been a real energy come out of the congregation and the minister as a particular leader to recognize that everything they haven't noticed is still around.
Thanks. I'm going to ask a question, and anyone on the panel can put up their hand to answer. And I'd like to hear from all of you, actually. So maybe, what sort of change would have the biggest impact on reducing poverty? Anybody got a good answer? Jennifer?
Certainly more employment to our area. We need more companies coming to our area, you know, and being able to provide our community opportunities to work. I mean, that's one of the biggest problems. The other would be affordable housing. We really need to start finding ways to create more. And I know that the city's working on it. I'm very aware that they're working on it, but we need a lot more. So I think, you know, those two would be the main biggie. Sustainable employment is hugely important, and it has to be more than just a minimum wage position for it to be sustainable.
Around the reducing some of the, as Jennifer said, employment as well, systemic barriers. There's so many barriers beyond just straight income levels and financial supports for long-term gain. Some of that real social investment on post-secondary school costs, reducing things like cost of tuition or a better loan system. There's a lot of talk around the cost of loans, students coming out of school with 10, 20 years of loan, student debt, and things like that. But there's all kinds of evidence to support linking lower education levels to lower earning levels and lower poverty levels, and also reduced health. So looking at some of those systemic things like education costs.
Thank you. I want to say, remind folks that this is the first in a series of 6 symposiums that will be happening every Monday night from now through to October 28th. So I think we miss October 14th, which is, of course, Thanksgiving. Please pick up a brochure at the back, and I would like to thank the panel very much for their time and efforts tonight, and I hope that everyone here has found something to take away from the discussion that is informative, educational, and perhaps thought-provoking for you, so that when you see folks who are seeking funds for whatever charity, we try and dig a little deeper and help them out if we can, or volunteer, or do whatever we can to try and help our fellow man, because, you know, I think there are 2 absolutes that I ever got from religion, and that was, there's a golden rule, do unto others as you would have them do unto you, and my other one is, we're all here to help each other, so let's see if we can do that. Thank you all very much for coming.